Hello and welcome to my channel, and welcome to this week's Wednesday Interlude, in which I discuss my reading progress of the books that I've been reading since last Wednesday, and in which I turn the spotlight on Sir Winston Churchill as a writer. And if you enjoy these spotlight on episodes and don't want to miss future episodes, be sure to subscribe and ring the notifications bell. But before that, I can confirm that I read 6 short stories in Conan Doyle's collection called Tales of Pirates and Blue Water. I read the 6 stories about pirates. The first 4 were about a notorious pirate called Captain Sharkey, of how he escaped being hung by killing the governor of St. Kitts and disguising himself, how Stephen Craddock tried to take him but was taken and killed by Sharkey instead, of how he was tricked into embracing a beautiful girl who infected him with leprosy, and of how a fellow pirate who pretended to be equally vicious deceived and finally killed Sharkey. The 5th story tells of how the Slapping Sal, a pirate ship, inadvertently saved an English ship from being blown to bits by a superior French frigate. The 6th story is a curious episode of a magistrate who pretends to be a highwayman so he can rob Sir George Wilde, a banker, who had taken his deposit when he knew his bank was failing. The way Doyle gets away with including this story in his pirate collection was to call it A Pirate of the Land. The stories are told with all of Doyle's usual skill, economy of words, and vivid and telling details. I'll have more to say about the first story in this collection in my 6 Degrees of Separation book tag, which will be published on Sunday. Now let us turn the spotlight on Sir Winston Churchill as a writer. Winston S. Churchill was born on the 30th of November 1874 in Blenheim Palace, the ancestral home of the Dukes of Marlborough, to Lady Randolph Churchill, the American wife of Lord Randolph Churchill. Winston's grandfather was the 7th Duke of Marlborough. It is important to understand that Churchill came from a distinguished aristocratic background, which accounts for much of his personality and general attitudes. Churchill was a restless, troublesome child, and at the age of 7 his mother packed him off to boarding school. Churchill wrote, "How I hated this school, and what a life of anxiety I lived there for more than 2 years. I made very little progress at my lessons, and none at all at games. The greatest pleasure I had in those days was reading. When I was 9½ my father gave me Treasure Island, and I remember the delight with which I devoured it." Churchill complained that at the age of 12 he had to take examinations for which he was ill-fitted, in Latin and mathematics, about which he knew nothing. He said he would rather that they tested him on history, poetry, and the writing of essays, areas in which he excelled. He wrote, "They always tried to ask what I did not know. I did not do well in examinations." As a result of the system in which Latin and Greek were taught as main subjects, of course Churchill was always at the bottom of his class and was considered a dunce. He was relegated to learn English instead, along with all the other dunces. The teacher assigned to this task turned out to be an excellent one, and thus Churchill gained a mastery of the English language that was to serve him both as a politician and a writer. While at Harrow, Churchill displayed his extraordinary memory by learning to recite by heart the 1200 lines of Macaulay's Lays of Ancient Rome, for which he won the headmaster's prize. He also managed to pass the examination for entry into the army class, which eventually led to him being admitted into Sandhurst as a cadet, but not without taking 3 tries to pass the entrance exam. He came 8th in his class and passed out with honours. It was as an officer in the army that Churchill first became a professional writer. He managed, with the influence of his mother, to finagle his way to becoming a war correspondent for the Pioneer newspaper and Daily Telegraph, when he managed to get himself assigned to the Malakand field force in India. It was from these experiences that in 1898, at the age of 22, he wrote his first book called The Story of the Malakand Field Force. The River War, an account of the reconquest of the Sudan, followed in 1899. In 1900, Churchill tried his hand at writing a novel, which was called Savrola, but his real forte was in writing first-hand accounts and biographical works, and thereafter he did not venture into writing fiction. In all, Churchill wrote 20 such works. Biographies of his father, Lord Randolph Churchill, a biography of his great ancestor, the 1st Duke of Marlborough, and short biographies of some of his contemporaries. But his greatest works were his autobiographical works: My Early Life, The World Crisis, and The Second World War, of which this is the first volume of 6. The reason that Churchill was so successful in writing these works was because he was an active participant and a leading light. In My Early Life, Churchill records his capture on November the 15th, 1899 by the Boer leader General Botha, who subsequently became President of South Africa, while he, Churchill, was acting as a war correspondent in Natal during the Boer War. His subsequent thrilling escape from the Boer prison camp catapulted him to public fame, especially as there was a price on his head of £25 for his recapture, dead or alive. On the back of this, he was elected as a Conservative Member of Parliament for Oldham. To support himself, he had earned £4,500 from his writings in terms of book sales and payments from newspapers for his correspondence, but to supplement this, he went on a lecture tour of America, at the end of which he was in possession of £10,000, which enabled him to give his time and attention to politics. After the First World War, Churchill wrote what many considered to be his magnum opus, the 4-volume work, The World Crisis, of which I have it in 2 volumes. This is nothing less than a memoir in which Churchill details all the behind-the-scenes operations of the war when he was First Lord of the Admiralty. His organisational brilliance, intellectual grasp of the immense details of every aspect of the war, his mental power and vital force are clearly displayed in this superb work. After World War II, he wrote the 6-volume memoir of his time as both Prime Minister and Minister of Defence, in which he exercised de facto dictatorial powers throughout the 5 years of the war. An Act of Parliament had given Churchill and the War Cabinet, consisting of 5 men, including Churchill, total control over all of manufacturing, banking, industry, agriculture, and the lives of every citizen of Great Britain. Churchill was in his element. He loved exercising power, and now he had absolute power voted to him by Parliament. Furthermore, Churchill had absolute confidence in the power of the written word. In fact, he conducted the entire war through written correspondence. He wrote, "It may be well at this point to describe the system and machinery for conducting military and other affairs which I set on foot and practised from my earliest days of power. I am a strong believer in transacting an official business by the written word. It is always better to express opinions and wishes rather than to give orders. Written directives coming personally from the lawfully constituted head of the government and minister specially charged with defence counted to such an extent that, though not expressed as orders, they very often found their fruition in action." Churchill says, "I issued during the crisis of July the following minute: Prime Minister to General Ismay, Chief of the Imperial General Staff, and Sir Edward Bridges, Secretary to the War Cabinet, dated the 19th of July 1940. let it be clearly understood that all directions emanating from me are made in writing, or should be immediately afterwards confirmed in writing, and that I do not accept responsibility for matters relating to national defence on which I am alleged to have given decisions unless they are recorded in writing. Every morning Churchill engaged himself in reading telegrams, dictating answers, and issuing a continuous flow of minutes and directives to the departments and to the chiefs of the staff committee. When out of office, Churchill continued his activities as a writer, speaker and journalist. He was justly acclaimed as a great orator, but what people do not realise is that all his great speeches were carefully crafted written expositions of his thought. Churchill was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1953 for his mastery of historical and biographical description, as well as for brilliant oratory in defending exalted human values. Sir Winston died on the 24th of January 1966, aged 91. In this brief introduction I could only hit some of the highlights, but if you'd like to learn more about Sir Winston Churchill's life and work, I refer you to the plethora of biographies that have been written of the great man. I own only one biography, which was prepared just prior to his death and which was published as a special memorial edition in 1965 to his life and work. The book is called Churchill, His Life and Times by Thomson. And it covers every important phase of his life and contains a wealth of photographs in every chapter. But if you really want to get to know Churchill, then read his own words, starting with My Early Life, and then go on from there. Let me know in the comments below if, after hearing about Churchill as a writer, you're not tempted to try reading My Early Life. If you are, I can confirm that second-hand copies are easily obtainable online. In this week's Sunday morning meetup, I will be presenting the 6 Degrees of Separation book tag, so be sure to subscribe and ring the notifications bell if you want to hear my take on this tag. So that's all, folks, and remember to comment, subscribe, like and share, and I'll be back soon with another BookTube video.